My beloved child. Stop scrolling for a moment, because what you are about to hear was meant to reach you before the feeling in their heart could be buried again. Something happened at a quiet dinner table, something so unexpected that the person connected to your soul could no longer pretend they had moved beyond you. They had gone there believing they were ready for a new beginning. They walked away realizing that every road they had taken to escape your memory had only led them back to you. Stay with this message until the end, because the reason they left that dinner is not the greatest revelation. What happened after they stepped outside is where the real mystery begins. The evening had been arranged carefully. Your soulmate had told themselves it was only dinner, only a conversation, only an opportunity to prove that life could continue without constantly returning to the thought of you. They chose their clothes with unusual attention, stood before the mirror longer than necessary, and practiced the calm expression they hoped would hide the uncertainty living behind their eyes. Yet from the moment they reached for the door, something inside them resisted. It was not fear. It was not guilt. It was a quiet inner pressure, as if an invisible hand were resting against their heart and asking, "Are you certain this is where you truly wish to go?" They ignored it. They believed they had to. For weeks, perhaps longer, people around them had been encouraging them to move forward. Someone had told them that waiting for a love they could not fully understand was keeping them trapped. Another voice had suggested that what they felt for you was only nostalgia, only attachment, only the memory of what might have been. Your soulmate tried to accept those explanations because they sounded reasonable. But some truths do not disappear simply because the mind creates a more convenient story. They arrived at the restaurant carrying all those borrowed opinions. The lights were warm, the music was soft, and the person waiting for them seemed kind. On the surface, everything looked right. There was no obvious reason for the evening to fail. That was what made what happened next so powerful. The conversation began easily. They exchanged polite questions, cautious laughter, and stories designed to reveal enough without revealing too much. Your soulmate smiled at the appropriate moments. They nodded. They listened. Anyone watching from another table would have believed they were completely present. But heaven could see where their heart had gone. It had already returned to you. Do not leave this message now. The first sign appeared before the food was even served, and your soulmate almost dismissed it. The person sitting opposite them used a phrase you once used, an ordinary collection of words that should have meant nothing. Yet the instant those words crossed the table, your soulmate stopped moving. For one brief second, the restaurant faded. They remembered your voice. They remembered the particular way you spoke when you were trying to hide how deeply you cared. They remembered a conversation they had replayed in private many times, though they had never admitted it to anyone. A door opened inside their memory, and behind that door stood everything they had tried not to feel. They quickly recovered. They lifted their glass, took a slow breath, and told themselves it was a coincidence. Then another detail appeared. The person across from them tilted their head while listening, and the expression on their face resembled one of yours. It was not an exact resemblance. Their features were different. Their voice was different. Their presence carried none of your familiar energy. But in that single movement, your soulmate saw a reflection of you. Their heart reacted before their mind could interfere. A warmth rose through their chest, followed by a sharp ache. It confused them because the person they were looking at was not you. And yet, for the briefest moment, your face seemed to emerge through someone else's expression as if their heart were projecting the truth it had refused to speak. That was when the evening changed. Your soulmate looked down at the table, hoping the feeling would pass. They studied the plate before them. They focused on the music. They searched the room for anything that might return them to the present. But the more desperately they tried not to think about you, the more vividly you appeared. They remembered your eyes when you were disappointed but unwilling to argue. They remembered a kindness you offered when you could easily have withdrawn it. They remembered the space between your words, the moments when your silence had said more than any confession. And then they realized something that frightened them, not because it was dangerous, but because it was undeniable. They were not looking for someone new. They were looking for pieces of you in everyone they met. Pause here, precious soul, because this is only the first revelation. The dinner did not fall apart because the other person said something wrong. It did not end because of an argument, an insult, or a visible sign of incompatibility. It ended because your soulmate suddenly understood that they had been comparing every detail of this stranger to you from the moment they sat down. The smile was pleasant, but it was not your smile. The conversation was interesting, but it did not make them feel known in the way your simplest words once had. The attention was sincere, yet it did not reach the hidden place inside them that had responded to your presence without effort. They had wanted proof that they could replace the connection. Instead, every pleasant moment became evidence that they could not reproduce it. Still, they remained seated. Their mind pleaded with them to stay. Leaving would raise questions. Leaving would mean admitting that they were not as detached as they had claimed. They had already told someone close to them that they were ready to move on. They had repeated those words until they almost believed them. So they continued the conversation while something inside them quietly broke open. Then came the moment no one at that table could have predicted. The person across from them began describing what they hoped to find in a relationship. They spoke about trust, emotional safety, patience, and the rare comfort of feeling understood without having to explain every wound. As your soulmate listened, they no longer heard the person's voice. They heard the description of what they had once felt with you. Not perfection. Not a fantasy. Recognition. A sense that they could remove the armor they wore around everyone else. That realization struck so deeply that their eyes began to fill. They turned toward the window before the emotion could be noticed. Outside, the city moved normally. Cars passed. Lights changed. People hurried along the pavement, unaware that one human heart had just been confronted by the truth it had been running from. Your soulmate whispered inwardly, "Why am I seeing them everywhere?" The answer did not come in words. It came through memory. They saw a moment they had never fully appreciated when it happened. You were listening to them speak about something small, something they assumed no one would remember. Days later, you mentioned it again. You had carried their words with you. You had shown them that their thoughts were worth keeping. At the time, they may have smiled and moved past it. But now, sitting across from someone new, they understood the depth of that gesture. You had not merely heard them. You had made a home for something they had said. And your soulmate had spent too long pretending that such a feeling could be found anywhere. Do not skip what comes next, because this was when their private awakening became visible. The other person noticed the change in their face and asked gently, "Are you all right?" Your soulmate tried to answer. They opened their mouth, but no convincing words came. How could they explain that they had just seen your face where it did not belong? How could they admit that an innocent conversation had exposed a love they had tried to lock away? They said they needed a moment. Their hands trembled slightly as they placed the napkin beside the plate. They apologized, stood up, and walked toward the restroom. But halfway there, they stopped. Something inside them knew that returning to the table would be dishonest. Not only to themselves, but also to the person who had arrived with sincere intentions. That person deserved to be seen for who they were, not measured against a memory they could never become. And your soulmate understood that if they remained, every smile would be a performance. Every question would be a delay. Every additional minute would move them further from the truth. So instead of turning toward the restroom, they walked toward the exit. The door opened. Cool air touched their face. And for the first time that evening, they could breathe. They stood on the pavement with the restaurant glowing behind them, struggling to understand what they had done. Part of them wanted to return, finish dinner, and pretend the interruption had meant nothing. But another part, the quieter, truer part, felt as though a chain had just fallen away. They had not walked out because they hated the person inside. They walked out because they could no longer use another human being to escape the love that still lived within them. Something huge was waiting beyond that decision, but even your soulmate did not know it yet. They took several steps down the street, then stopped beneath a light. Their first instinct was to reach for their phone. Their fingers moved toward your name before they could reconsider. Perhaps your conversation was still there. Perhaps it had been archived, muted, or hidden beneath months of silence. But your name remained exactly where their heart had kept it. They stared at it. One touch could have opened the space between you. One message could have changed the direction of the night. But they did not press it. Not yet. Their fear returned with questions it had used many times before. What if you no longer cared? What if they had waited too long? What if reaching out reopened something you had struggled to heal? What if the love they felt was real, but the timing had already been lost? They locked the phone and placed it back in their pocket. Then it vibrated. Their heart leaped because, for one impossible second, they believed it might be you. It was not. It was a message from the person still waiting inside the restaurant. Did I do something wrong? Those words pierced your soulmate with unexpected sorrow. They had never intended to hurt anyone. They looked back through the window and saw the table where two glasses still stood. One chair was occupied. The other was empty. That empty chair became a mirror. They understood that leaving without honesty would repeat the very pattern that had brought so much confusion into their life. They had avoided difficult truths, delayed important words, and believed silence could protect everyone. But silence had not protected love. It had only forced love to speak through distance. Your soulmate returned to the restaurant. Now stay with this, because what they said at that table was the first honest confession they had made about you in a very long time. They approached slowly and apologized. The other person asked again whether something had happened. Your soulmate sat down, but they did not reach for the carefully prepared mask they had worn earlier. They said, "You did nothing wrong." Then came a long pause. They looked at the person before them and continued, "I thought I was ready to be here, but I realized I'm still connected to someone. I have been trying to convince myself that I'm not. That isn't fair to you." The word surprised even them. The other person remained quiet, perhaps disappointed, perhaps already aware that some invisible third presence had occupied the evening. Yet they did not respond with anger. Instead, they asked the question your soulmate had avoided asking themselves. Do they know how you feel? The entire room seemed to fall silent. Your soulmate lowered their eyes. No, they answered. I don't think they do. That answer carried more weight than anyone at the table understood. Because it was not merely an admission that you did not know their present feelings. It was an acknowledgement that you may never have known the full depth of what they felt, even when you were closest. Their fear had translated love into mixed signals. Their pride had made tenderness appear uncertain. Their confusion had caused them to withdraw at the moments when honesty mattered most. And while you may have wondered whether the connection was real, your soulmate had been fighting its reality in private. The person across from them asked, "Then why are you here with me?" Your soulmate had no defense. Because the truth was painful, they had come to the dinner hoping a stranger could erase a bond they were too afraid to face. They had mistaken distraction for healing. They had believed that moving forward meant moving away from you, when perhaps the only way forward was to stop hiding from what remained unfinished. They apologized again and offered to cover the dinner. The other person looked at them with an expression that held disappointment but also compassion. And then they said something your soulmate would remember long after leaving that restaurant. Maybe you didn't see their face in mine. Maybe you finally saw your own heart clearly. That sentence followed them outside. Read it again within your spirit, because it altered the meaning of the entire night. Your soulmate had believed your memory was haunting them. But perhaps it was not a haunting at all. Perhaps it was recognition. Perhaps their heart had used the reflection of you to show them that they were still carrying words that needed to be spoken. There is a difference between being unable to let go and being unwilling to betray what you know is true. Your soulmate had spent months confusing the two. They left the restaurant properly this time. The date ended without cruelty, without a dramatic confrontation, and without anyone becoming the villain. Yet inside your soulmate, something monumental had begun. They walked without choosing a direction. The city air felt sharper. Every sound seemed unusually clear. Their footsteps formed a rhythm beneath them, as though they were moving toward an answer their mind had not yet discovered. They passed a window and saw their reflection. For a moment, they barely recognized themselves. They looked tired, not physically, but emotionally. They saw the cost of carrying a hidden truth. They saw how much energy they had spent trying to appear unaffected. They saw a person who had waited for certainty while ignoring the certainty already beating beneath their ribs. Then another memory rose. It was not one of the beautiful moments. It was the moment something shifted between you. Perhaps there had been a misunderstanding. Perhaps a message went unanswered. Perhaps timing, distance, family, pride, or personal wounds stood between what you both felt and what you were able to express. Whatever form it took, your soulmate remembered the exact instant they chose protection over vulnerability. They had told themselves that withdrawing would give them control. Instead, it created the silence they now feared could never be crossed. Stay until the final word, because your soulmate was about to uncover something they had hidden even from themselves. They did not walk away from you because they felt nothing. They walked away because what they felt threatened every defense they had built. You reached a part of them that had survived by remaining guarded. Your presence made them imagine a future they could not control. Your kindness awakened a desire to be fully known, but being fully known meant allowing someone to see both their strength and their unfinished wounds. They were not prepared for that. So when the connection deepened, they searched for reasons to doubt it. They examined your imperfections. They replayed your mistakes. They created impossible tests without telling you what they were testing. Each time fear whispered that love could lead to loss, they treated the warning as fact. Yet none of those defenses erased you. They merely made the love harder to reach. That night, as they walked through the city, your soulmate understood that they had not been waiting to forget you. They had been waiting for their fear to become quieter than their longing. And at the dinner table, it finally had. They stopped beside a small park where the trees moved gently in the wind. A bench stood beneath a street lamp, and they sat there alone. The phone came out again. Your name appeared. This time they opened the conversation. The last message between you carried an energy they had never fully processed. Perhaps it was warm. Perhaps it was painful. Perhaps it ended with words that seemed ordinary while concealing everything neither of you knew how to say. Your soulmate scrolled upward. They found moments when you had checked on them without asking for anything in return. They saw evidence of your patience. They noticed places where you had reached toward them and where their responses had become shorter because the closeness was frightening them. For the first time, they read the conversation without defending their behavior. The truth was humbling. You had not always understood what they needed, but you had tried. You had not been perfect, but you had been real. And in their attempt to protect themselves from possible disappointment, they may have created the very separation that caused both of you pain. Their eyes filled again. This time, they did not look away. Tears came quietly, not because they believed everything was lost, but because they finally understood what had nearly been sacrificed. They had treated your connection as though it could wait forever. They assumed there would always be another opportunity, another conversation, another sign. But the empty chair at dinner had awakened them to the fragility of time. People do not remain standing at closed doors indefinitely. Hearts can love deeply and still learn to protect themselves. You may have carried hope, but hope cannot be asked to survive on silence alone. That realization created urgency. Your soulmate began typing. The first words were simple: "Can we talk?" They stared at the message. Then they erased it. It felt too small for everything rising inside them. They typed again, "Something happened tonight, and it made me realize I haven't been honest." Again, they stopped. That message felt closer to the truth, but fear whispered that it revealed too much. Their thumb hovered over the screen as the old conflict returned. One part of them wanted to send everything. Another part wanted to disappear before vulnerability could expose them. Archangel Michael, in this fictional spiritual vision, stood as a symbol of courage beside that trembling moment. Not to control their choice, but to remind their spirit that truth requires bravery. The message carried no threat. It carried an invitation: stop allowing fear to make decisions that love must later repair. Your soulmate closed their eyes. Within that silence, they remembered something you once said. It may have been about honesty, timing, or the importance of saying what matters while there is still a chance. They had not realized how deeply those words remained within them. Now they returned like a bell in the night. They began writing a third time. This message was longer. They wrote that they had tried to move forward. They admitted that they had gone to dinner with someone. They explained that the evening had been kind and normal until a gesture, a phrase, and a certain expression brought your face into their mind with impossible clarity. They wrote, "I realized I have been looking for what I felt with you in people who were never meant to carry that comparison." They paused after that sentence. It was the most honest thing they had written in months. But the message was still unfinished. Your soulmate continued. They confessed that distance had not created peace. They admitted that they had been afraid of the depth of the connection. They acknowledged that their silence may have communicated the opposite of what was living in their heart. Then they reached the sentence that terrified them most. I still love you. Their entire body became still. Those 4 words glowed on the screen. For so long, they had found softer names for what they felt. Attachment. Concern. Memory. Curiosity. Unfinished emotion. They had used every label except the true one because the true one demanded a decision. Love. Once named, it could no longer be treated as a passing thought. But just before they could send the message, something unexpected happened. A notification appeared, not from you, but from someone in their family. The message contained a photograph. At first, your soulmate almost dismissed it. They were too overwhelmed to shift attention away from the confession waiting on their screen. Yet something about the image made them open it. It was an old photograph from a gathering they had nearly forgotten. Several people stood together, smiling at the camera. Your soulmate appeared near the edge. And there, partially visible in the background, was something that caused their breath to catch. You. You were not the central subject of the picture. Perhaps you did not even realize the photograph had been taken. But your expression was turned toward your soulmate, and the emotion visible in your face could not be mistaken. You were looking at them with a tenderness they had failed to notice at the time. The photograph had captured what neither of you had said. Your soulmate enlarged the image. Their fingers trembled as they studied your eyes. There was affection there, but also uncertainty. Hope mingled with restraint. It looked as though your heart had been waiting for permission to reveal itself. They checked the date. The photograph had been taken near the beginning of the period when everything became complicated. Your soulmate remembered that evening differently. They had believed you were distracted, perhaps distant. They had interpreted your caution as a lack of feeling. But the photograph told another story. You had not been indifferent. You had been afraid too. This was the next great revelation: the silence between you may never have meant absence of love. It may have been 2 hearts protecting themselves at the same time, each waiting for the other to provide certainty first. Imagine the weight of that discovery. Your soulmate had spent months believing they were alone in what they felt. They had tried to dismiss the connection because they thought it had mattered more to them than to you. Yet the expression preserved in that photograph suggested that you had carried something profound, something they never gave you enough safety to speak. They read the family member's message beneath the photo, found this while looking through old pictures. Look at the way that person was looking at you. Your soulmate's heart pounded. The timing felt impossible. Why had this photograph appeared on the same night they saw your face during a dinner with someone else? Why had the past chosen this exact moment to become visible? Why, when they were finally preparing to confess, had evidence of your hidden tenderness arrived in their hands? In the language of this fictional heavenly story, it felt as though the truth had gathered every scattered fragment and placed them together at once. The borrowed expression at dinner. The empty chair. The stranger's compassionate words. The old conversation. The unsent confession. The photograph. Each piece pointed toward the same unfinished door. But do not assume the answer became easy. The photograph gave your soulmate hope, yet it also intensified their regret. If you had cared so deeply, how much had their withdrawal hurt you? How many times had you waited for clarity that never arrived? How often had you questioned your worth because they could not communicate their fear? Your soulmate pressed a hand against their face. They wished they could return to the moment in the photograph. They imagined walking across the room, standing before you, and saying everything they now understood. They wanted to tell that earlier version of you, "You are not imagining this. I feel it too. I am only afraid." But the past does not reopen simply because wisdom arrives late. The present, however, was still waiting. They returned to the message they had been writing. The words, "I still love you," remained there, surrounded by everything else they had confessed. Their thumb moved toward the send button. Then your conversation status changed. You appeared online. The tiny sign of your presence sent a shock through them. Somewhere, perhaps only a short distance away or perhaps separated by miles, you were awake. You were holding your own phone. You were living through a night that seemed ordinary, unaware that their entire emotional world had shifted. Your soulmate imagined the message arriving on your screen. Would you open it immediately? Would you hesitate? Would your heart recognize what it had been waiting to hear, or would old pain tell you to protect yourself? Their courage wavered. At that exact moment, you disappeared offline. They had missed the window by seconds. Or so they thought. Because your soulmate did not yet know that you had opened the old conversation too. This is where the mystery deepens, precious soul. In this fictional tale, two people sat beneath the same night, each staring at the same history from opposite sides. Neither could see what was happening in the other's heart. Yet both had been drawn toward the conversation at almost the same moment. You may know what it is to feel someone unexpectedly without understanding why. A memory enters without warning. A name carries unusual weight. A familiar feeling moves through the heart, asking to be acknowledged. In stories of spiritual connection, these moments symbolize emotional truths rising before the mind has words for them. Your soulmate looked again at the unsent message. They decided that 4 words were not enough. Not because, "I still love you," was untrue, but because love without accountability could sound like another promise without foundation. They wanted you to know not only what they felt, but what they had finally understood. So they added more. They wrote that they did not expect immediate forgiveness. They wrote that they would respect whatever boundaries you needed. They admitted that feelings alone could not repair what silence had damaged. They promised no impossible future. They made no demand. Instead, they offered truth. "I am not asking you to forget what happened," they wrote. "I am asking for the chance to tell you what I was too afraid to say." The sentence changed the energy of the message. Now it was not merely a confession. It was a doorway. Your soulmate read everything from the beginning. Their heart accelerated with every line. They had never spoken so openly, not to you, perhaps not even to themselves. Sending it would remove the protection of ambiguity. They would no longer be able to pretend you misunderstood because they had never explained. If you rejected the message, they would feel the full consequence of waiting. If you answered, life could change. Their thumb touched the screen. But before the message left their phone, an incoming call appeared. The name on the screen made them freeze. It was the person from the dinner. Your soulmate stared at the call, confused. They had already apologized. The evening had ended. There seemed to be nothing more to say. Yet something urged them to answer, perhaps because the person had shown unexpected kindness. They accepted the call. The voice on the other end sounded serious. "I wasn't going to tell you this," the person said, "because I thought it might seem strange. But after you left, I remembered where I had seen you before." Your soulmate stood abruptly from the bench. "What do you mean?" There was a pause. The caller explained that months earlier, they had attended an event, visited a place, or crossed paths with someone connected to your soulmate's life. At first, the memory had seemed insignificant. But during the dinner, as your soulmate spoke and repeatedly lost focus, the forgotten detail returned. They had seen a photograph before. A photograph of your soulmate beside someone else. Beside you. Your soulmate's pulse quickened. The caller continued, "The person who showed me that picture said something about you. I didn't know it was you until tonight." Now the city around your soulmate felt completely still. They asked who had shown the photograph. The answer was not what they expected. It had not been a stranger. It had been someone who knew you. Someone who had heard you speak about the connection. Someone who knew part of the truth that your soulmate had never been told. Your soulmate gripped the phone and asked, "What did they say?" Another pause followed, longer this time. The caller seemed unsure whether revealing the memory was appropriate. Then they answered carefully. They said the person standing beside you had loved you quietly for a long time, but believed you had already chosen to let them go. The word struck harder than anything else that night. Your soulmate could not speak. The photograph from their family remained open beneath the call. Your face was still there, turned toward them with tenderness and uncertainty. The confession they had written waited unsent in the background. And now an almost stranger was telling them that you had carried love while believing it was unwanted. Every assumption collapsed at once. Your soulmate had believed you moved on because you did not care. You may have stepped back because you believed they did not choose you. They had interpreted your protection as rejection. You had perhaps interpreted their fear as an ending. Two people had walked away from the same doorway, each thinking the other had closed it first. Your soulmate's voice trembled as they asked when this conversation had taken place. The caller gave a date. That date awakened one final memory. On that very day, you had almost contacted your soulmate. Perhaps you sent something and removed it. Perhaps your name appeared briefly on their screen. Perhaps a mutual connection mentioned you. Your soulmate remembered noticing the sign but refusing to respond because they assumed reopening communication would only create confusion. Now they understood, you may have been standing at the edge of your own confession. And they had missed it. The person from the dinner said one last thing before ending the call. If you care about them, stop making them guess. Then the line went silent. Your soulmate remained standing beneath the street lamp, holding a phone that now seemed heavier than before. They no longer had the comfort of uncertainty. Every revelation had brought them to this exact moment. They returned to the unsent message. They read the words again. This time, they did not erase them. They added one final sentence. I walked out of that dinner because, for 1 second, I saw your face, and then I realized it had been your face I was searching for all along. Their thumb hovered over the arrow. The night seemed to hold its breath. Then they pressed send. The message traveled. There was no way to retrieve it now. Your soulmate watched the screen as one mark appeared, then another. The confession had reached your phone. Every truth they had hidden was now waiting behind your locked screen. Seconds passed. Then a minute. You did not appear online. Your soulmate sat down again, suddenly overwhelmed by everything they had done. They imagined you asleep. They imagined your phone lying in another room. They imagined you seeing their name and choosing not to open it. But the most frightening possibility was also the most hopeful. Perhaps you had seen the notification and were gathering the courage to face it. Your soulmate waited. The restaurant was far behind them now, yet the dinner had changed the direction of their life. What began as an attempt to forget you had become the night they finally chose honesty. Still, one mystery remained. The family photograph had not been sent by accident. The person who discovered it had been searching through old pictures for a specific reason, one your soulmate had not yet asked about. And when they finally looked again at the message accompanying the image, they noticed another line beneath the first. A line they had overlooked in their emotional shock. It said, "There is something written on the back of the original photograph. I think you need to see it before you contact them." Your soulmate's breath caught. They immediately called the family member. No answer. They called again. Still nothing. Then a new photograph arrived. It showed the reverse side of the old picture. The writing was faded, but readable. There was a date, a small symbol, and a message written in handwriting your soulmate recognized. Your handwriting. Yet your soulmate had no memory of writing it. They enlarged the image and began reading the words. The first sentence made their heart stop, because it revealed that long before the separation, before the silence, before the missed messages, before tonight's dinner, they had already made a promise concerning you. A promise they had somehow forgotten. And just as they reached the final line, your status appeared on the screen. You were online. The confession showed as opened. 3 dots appeared beneath it. You were typing. But before your reply arrived, your soulmate read the last words written on the back of that photograph, and realized someone else had known the truth about both of you from the very beginning.